Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. I knew the boundaries from the start. As a personal assistant at a high-end marketing firm, my job was clear: manage schedules, coordinate meetings, and ensure that clients were treated with professionalism and efficiency. Among the many clients I dealt with, one stood out not because he was particularly demanding or impressive, but because of the subtle, magnetic way he moved through a room. His name was Daniel, and from the very first meeting, I felt something I couldn't quite name: a pull, quiet but undeniable, beneath the surface of polite professionalism. Daniel was wealthy, of course, impeccably dressed and charming in ways that felt effortless. We met initially to discuss a campaign for his company, a series of advertisements that would launch nationwide. I answered his questions, scheduled appointments, and sent follow-up emails. But it wasn't long before the way he looked at me lingered longer than necessary. The way he smiled seemed to carry a personal weight, a recognition that went beyond the transactional. I told myself it was nothing. I repeated the mantra that professionals maintain boundaries. Yet I felt my pulse quicken when he entered a room, and I found myself anticipating his messages, checking my inbox a few minutes too often, imagining the tone of his next call. The first sign that the professional line was blurring came during a late evening meeting in his office. It was just the two of us, reviewing final drafts. The office was dim, illuminated only by the soft glow of the city outside the window and a single desk lamp. We talked about the campaign, numbers, demographics, and yet the conversation drifted, almost imperceptibly, into more personal territory. He asked about my weekend, my family, my hobbies, not intrusive, but curious, engaged. I smiled, tried to maintain composure, but when his hand brushed mine lightly as he passed me a pen, I felt a jolt I could not deny. It was electric and forbidden. Over the next few weeks, our interactions increased in intensity, though we maintained the facade of professionalism. Phone calls stretched longer than necessary. Emails grew more casual, playful even. I noticed small changes in myself. I lingered on his name, thought about him in quiet moments, imagined scenarios I should have dismissed, and yet the thrill was addictive. There was danger in it, the unspoken tension that hovered over every glance and every chance meeting. It was a rainy Thursday evening when it happened, the moment that crossed all boundaries. Daniel had asked me to stay late to finalize some presentation materials. The office was nearly empty, the hum of computers and the occasional drip from the rain outside the only sounds. We were sitting side by side at a long conference table, the light from the desk lamp casting soft shadows. We spoke about the project, then about life, dreams, and frustrations. I looked up, and he was watching me, eyes dark, intent, unreadable yet urgent. Before I knew it, the air between us shifted. He leaned closer under the pretense of examining a slide, his breath brushing my cheek. I froze for a moment, torn between reason and desire. And then, impossibly, he kissed me. Tentative at first, almost testing the waters, then with a force, an urgency that made my world tilt. All caution, all professionalism, all internal rules evaporated. I kissed him back, desperate, reckless, aware that this would change everything. After that night, secrecy became our rhythm. Meetings, messages, and interactions took on dual meanings. A lunch meeting was no longer just about work. It was a stolen hour where we could touch hands briefly under the table, exchange fleeting glances, brush against each other in elevators. Every encounter carried a dangerous thrill, a mixture of exhilaration and guilt. We hid behind professionalism, using it as a cover, but the line had been crossed irreparably. I began to notice the changes in myself. I was more restless, distracted. During work, often daydreaming about him in moments I should have been focused. Guilt gnawed at me constantly. I was betraying my principles, risking my career, my reputation, everything I had built for the thrill of a forbidden connection. And yet, the pull was irresistible. The temptation, the intimacy, the attention I had not felt in years became intoxicating. We were careful yet careless at the same time. One night, After a particularly stressful week, Daniel invited me to dinner. At his apartment, it was casual, supposedly a work dinner. But the moment I stepped inside, the pretense evaporated. He poured wine, we spoke about strategy, then about personal regrets, laughter, fears. And then, without warning, our lips met again. That night became a blur of whispered confessions, stolen touches, and reckless abandon. I went home with my heart racing, my mind a tangle of desire, guilt, and self-recrimination. Months passed in this rhythm. We managed to hide it from the world, yet every encounter carried the risk of exposure. Our office, the places we frequented, even casual colleagues could have witnessed the subtle signs, the way we lingered a second too long in conversation, the way our eyes sought each other out. Each moment was a gamble, and that danger only intensified the connection. I knew it couldn't last forever. We were walking a tightrope suspended over a canyon of consequences. The tipping point came unexpectedly. One of Daniel's colleagues, a new hire, began asking questions, curious about our frequent one-on-one meetings. We grew nervous. Our messages became coded, our lunch meetings moved to secluded corners, our stolen moments brief but intense. The intensity of desire began to be eclipsed by the weight of paranoia. I realized that the thrill was no longer enough to mask the risk. The excitement had to be measured against the damage it could cause. Eventually, the inevitable happened. A careless message, sent to the wrong email address, exposed our affair. I received a call from HR, a summons to a formal meeting that felt like a death sentence. The professional world I had navigated with pride, the reputation I had cultivated, all teetered on the edge of ruin. Daniel and I were forced to confront the consequences of our actions publicly and privately. The spark that had been so intoxicating was now a source of shame, anxiety, and loss. In the aftermath, I resigned from the company. Daniel and I parted ways, the connection severed by circumstance and accountability. The affair, which had once consumed us both, was now a memory etched into my mind with equal parts longing and regret. I grappled with guilt, reflection, and the difficult work of rebuilding my sense of self and professional integrity. Years later, I still think of him not with the reckless desire that once burned so brightly, but with a quiet understanding of the lessons learned. He had shown me the fragility of temptation, the intoxicating power of forbidden desire, and the heavy cost of crossing lines meant to be respected. The memory remains a complex mix of thrill, sorrow, and insight into human vulnerability, shaping the way I approach relationships, desire, and trust in the years that followed. I could feel the tension building before I even arrived at the office. That morning, my mind was restless, replaying the events of the previous night over and over. Daniel's touch, the intensity in his gaze, the thrill that had left me both elated and terrified. I knew it was reckless, but I couldn't stop thinking about him. Even the smallest details, like the way his fingers had brushed mine as he handed me the wine glass, were etched into my memory with painful clarity. The office felt unusually quiet, empty except for the early arrivals. I moved through my routine mechanically, answering emails and checking schedules, but my thoughts kept drifting. I could sense him before I even saw him. His presence filled the room the way it always did. Subtle but undeniable. When he finally appeared at the doorway of the conference room, I felt a familiar rush of heat in my chest. He smiled at me in that effortless, magnetic way that always made me forget everything else. That morning, we had a client call scheduled with another company, and I tried to focus on preparing the materials, rehearsing notes, and double-checking figures. But every glance at him reminded me of last night, the way his hand had lingered on mine, the secret smile, the subtle tension in the curve of his shoulders. It was distracting, dangerous, and exhilarating all at once. After the call ended and the other participants left, he lingered in the conference room. I tried to maintain my professional demeanor, but it was impossible. He leaned against the edge of the table, and for a moment, the entire office vanished. It was just the two of us, and the unspoken words between us carried more weight than anything spoken aloud. "You're tense," he said softly, his voice low, intimate. "I'm fine." I lied, my throat suddenly dry. You're not. He countered, stepping closer. The scent of his cologne, faint but sharp, filled my senses. I felt a shiver run through me. I can feel it. We both knew what he meant. The tension, the attraction, the dangerous pull we were both trying to resist, it had become a living thing between us. I tried to retreat, to ground myself in reason, but my body betrayed me. When he reached out and brushed a strand of hair, behind my ear, it was like an electric current shot through me. I couldn't stop myself from leaning into the touch. After that morning, our encounters became increasingly bold, though we never spoke openly about what we were doing. Lunch meetings became longer, sometimes ending in a walk through quiet city streets or a coffee in a secluded cafe. The world around us existed in fragments, blurry and irrelevant, as we navigated stolen moments with increasing urgency. Each encounter was a mixture of thrill and guilt, a delicate dance along a line we both knew we shouldn't cross. One afternoon, Daniel asked me to meet him at his apartment to review some campaign mock-ups. The city was washed in a soft rain, and I could hear the drizzle against the windows of the office as I gathered my things. When I arrived, he was waiting, casual but with a tension in his posture that mirrored my own. He offered me a drink, and I took it, trying to calm the nervous energy coursing through me. We talked about the campaign, about minor adjustments and final touches, but the conversation quickly shifted. It always did. There was an intimacy in our exchanges that went beyond work questions about family, childhood memories, fears, and desires. And then, as I leaned over the table to point something out on the mock-up, he was suddenly behind me. His hands rested lightly on my shoulders, and I felt the warmth radiate through me. I can't stop thinking about you, he murmured, his breath close to my ear. I froze, torn between instinct and caution. And then I turned and our lips met tentative, urgent, desperate. It was the kind of kiss that made everything else disappear. A moment suspended in time where reason had no power. We broke apart, gasping, our foreheads touching, hearts pounding in unison. After that night, the secrecy intensified. Our interactions were no longer just work-related. They were infused with a dangerous intimacy that grew more consuming with each encounter. We developed a routine, a rhythm that allowed us to steal moments without detection. A quick touch in the elevator, a lingering glance across the conference room, whispered messages that carried double meanings. Every interaction was charged with tension, yet we remained careful, aware that a single misstep could destroy everything. Despite the thrill, I began to notice the emotional toll. I was constantly on edge, balancing my professional responsibilities with the intensity of our clandestine connection. Sleep was elusive. My thoughts were consumed by him, by what we were doing, and by the inevitable consequences. The guilt was a constant shadow, a reminder that I was betraying my own values, putting my career at risk, and stepping into a moral gray zone that seemed to deepen with every encounter. One evening, we met at a quiet bar downtown far from our usual haunts. The city lights reflected in the windows, and the hum of conversation around us felt distant, almost unreal. We sat close, our hands brushing, sharing drinks and stolen glances. The tension between us was palpable, a living thing that seemed to vibrate in the air. I don't know how long we can keep doing this, I admitted quietly, my fingers twisting nervously around the stem of my glass. He looked at me, his eyes dark and intent. I don't want to stop, he said simply, and there was an honesty in his voice that made my chest ache. I can't. We kissed again, slow and deliberate this time, savoring the connection while fully aware of the danger. It was intoxicating, suffocating, and exhilarating all at once. That night, we stayed until the bar closed, walking the empty streets afterward, hands entwined, hearts racing, knowing that we were both walking a tightrope over consequences. We could not yet see. Eventually, the inevitable happened. A single, careless message, an email sent in haste, exposed our affair. The fallout was immediate. HR summoned me to a meeting. Daniel faced questions from his superiors, and our carefully constructed world collapsed around us. The thrill, the passion, the intimacy we had shared was now a source of shame and regret. In the aftermath, we parted ways. I resigned, he was reassigned, and the connection that had consumed us became a memory etched into my mind with equal parts longing, guilt, and reflection. I struggled to rebuild my professional reputation, to reconcile my actions with the person I wanted to be. The intensity of our affair lingered, a constant reminder of the dangerous intersection between desire and morality. Years later, I still think of him, not with the reckless longing that once consumed me, but with a quiet understanding of what it means to be human, vulnerable to temptation, drawn to forbidden desire, and yet capable of reflection and growth. The experience changed me, shaping the way I approach relationships, the boundaries I set, and the way I navigate the delicate balance between passion and responsibility. Even now, when I pass through familiar streets or hear a song we once shared, a flicker of memory rises, a reminder of a connection that burned brightly, if briefly, in a world where nothing else mattered. It is neither regret nor longing alone, but a testament to the complexity of desire, the weight of choices, and the enduring lessons of crossing a line we perhaps should never have approached. The weeks after the fallout were a blur of emotion and exhaustion. I tried to immerse myself in work, taking on extra projects, long hours at the office, anything to keep my mind from wandering to him, to the moments we had shared, to the stolen kisses and whispered confessions. But no matter how busy I became, the memories refused to fade. Every time I passed a cafe we had visited together, or a street corner where we had lingered, a pang of longing would hit me, sharp and unrelenting. I began to notice patterns in myself that I hadn't acknowledged before. My laughter had a hollow edge. My smiles sometimes felt automatic, mechanical, as though my body remembered joy even when my heart did not. Nights were the hardest. Alone in my apartment, the silence pressed down, and I replayed every detail of our affair, every word, every glance, every brush of skin. I hated myself for the betrayal, but I also couldn't deny the intensity of what we had shared, the way it had consumed me entirely, leaving no space for doubt or distraction. Daniel tried to reach out at first, tentative messages filled with apology, longing, and uncertainty. I read them and felt my chest tighten with both desire and dread. Part of me wanted to respond, to meet him again, to recapture even a fragment of what we had lost. But reason went out, and I didn't reply. I couldn't risk repeating the same mistakes, couldn't allow myself to be drawn back into a situation that had already proven so destructive. Despite my resolve, I found that our connection had left an indelible mark. In meetings with clients, in casual conversations with colleagues, I would catch myself comparing them to him, the ease of his speech, the subtle intensity of his gaze, the quiet confidence that had drawn me in. Other relationships felt flat, lacking the combustible spark that had existed between us. I realized, painfully, that part of what made our affair so irresistible was the very danger that made it impossible. Over time, I began to rebuild my sense of self, focusing on my personal growth, reconnecting with friends, and rediscovering hobbies that had fallen by the wayside. Yoga, early morning runs, cooking classes. I threw myself into anything that demanded attention and presence, trying to replace obsession with discipline. Yet, even in these moments of self-improvement, I sometimes caught myself daydreaming about him, imagining what it would have been like if circumstances had been different, if our connection had been allowed to flourish without the shadow of secrecy and betrayal. I also reflected on the lessons of the affair. I learned how desire can blind, how attraction can override reason, and how easy it is to justify actions in the heat of passion. I realized that intimacy is not merely physical, it carries responsibility, trust, and consequences. I understood that the choices we make in moments of temptation can ripple outward, touching lives in ways we may never fully comprehend. Months turned into years. The intensity of the memory softened, though it never entirely disappeared. I started dating, again cautiously at first, then with more openness, seeking love that was grounded in trust, transparency, and shared values. Those relationships were not without challenges, but I approached them differently, carrying the wisdom of past mistakes like a compass guiding me through uncertain terrain. Every so often, I would hear news of Daniel through mutual friends or professional circles. He had moved on as well, forging a path that seemed both fulfilling and separate from the chaos we had created together. I felt a mixture of relief and wistfulness relief that he was living a life unburdened by our affair, and wistfulness for the intensity that had once defined our connection. I never reached out. To do so would have been selfish, an attempt to reclaim what had already been lost. Instead, I held our memories quietly, as one might hold a fragile keepsake, knowing that its value lay not in reclaiming it, but in remembering it with honesty. Over time, the intensity of emotion gave way to a deeper, more reflective understanding of myself and my desires. I could look back at that period of my life without being consumed by guilt or longing. I understood. That passion, even forbiddance passion, teaches us about the depths of our own hearts, the vulnerabilities we hide, and the boundaries we are capable of respecting when we truly try. Years later, in quiet moments alone, I sometimes replay the scenes in my mind, the first hesitant touch, the stolen kiss in the dim apartment light, the thrill of secrecy and the heartbreak of discovery. They are not regrets in the conventional sense, nor are they sources of longing strong enough to disrupt my present life. They are memories, vivid and enduring, a testament to the fact that we are shaped as much by our choices as by our passions. The affair changed me. It taught me caution, self-awareness, and the need for honesty, but it also reminded me that life is never simple. Desire and morality often collide, creating consequences that must be lived with and understood. And though the fire between Daniel and me had long since cooled, the echoes of that fire remained a part of me, quiet, subtle, and infinitely instructive. Even now, when I walk through the city streets where we once met or pass a cafe that holds traces of laughter and tension, I feel a flicker of remembrance, not longing, not regret, but recognition of the person I was, the choices I made, and the lessons learned. It is a bittersweet acknowledgement that some connections are meant to teach us rather than last, meant to shape us rather than define us. Life went on. I found love again, the kind that is steady, nurturing, and transparent. I built a life grounded in integrity and care, conscious of the fragile balance between desire and responsibility. And yet, in quiet solitude, I sometimes allow myself to remember, not to yearn, but to appreciate the complex tapestry of emotions, choices, and consequences that had brought me to this moment. The affair had been a chapter of recklessness, but it had also been a chapter of growth, a reminder that even the most forbidden connections can illuminate who we are, if only we are willing to learn. Even as years passed, the shadows of that affair lingered in subtle ways I could never fully shake. There were mornings when a song would play on the radio, and I'd catch myself transported to a rainy afternoon spent in his apartment, sunlight dim and warm against the walls, our laughter echoing with a reckless joy I hadn't allowed myself to feel since. Other times, the scent of coffee or the way a man glanced at me in passing would conjure memories of stolen glances and whispered conversations, stirring a mix of nostalgia, longing, and quiet guilt. I tried to channel these emotions into understanding myself better. I journaled, walked long stretches through city streets, and even took up painting, letting the brushstrokes carry the intensity I could no longer express aloud. In the act of creation, I found a kind of catharsis. Colors blended on canvas, the way our hands had intertwined, the curves and shadows of paint reflecting the complexity of desire and regret intertwined. It was an outlet, a private sanctuary where I could relive the moments without causing harm to anyone else. Work became a refuge. I immersed myself in my career, taking on projects that were challenging and rewarding, hoping to anchor myself in accomplishment rather than memory. Yet the lessons from the affair were never far from my mind. I became hyper-aware of boundaries, of the fragile threads of trust, and of the responsibility one bears not only to oneself but to others. Every professional interaction carried a heightened sense of integrity, a quiet vigilance against crossing lines that I now knew could fracture lives Romantic relationships after that period were inevitably cautious. I met people who were kind and intelligent, but I approached them with care, aware that passion without responsibility could become destructive. Love was no longer something to dive into blindly. It was a deliberate choice, a careful negotiation between heart and reason. I cherished honesty above all else, knowing firsthand the devastation that secrecy could cause. Even family dynamics were affected. Mutual friends and acquaintances occasionally mentioned him in passing, and I would smile politely, careful not to betray the whirlwind of memories that surged beneath the surface. Some encounters were uncomfortable, a reminder that the consequences of our actions ripple far beyond the immediate moment. I learned patience and discretion, understanding that time softens, but does not erase, the impact of our choices. I often reflected on the nature of desire itself. It was thrilling, intoxicating, and at times blinding, but it was also fleeting, when untethered from responsibility. The intensity that had drawn me to him had taught me about the duality of human emotion, how something beautiful could simultaneously be dangerous, and how passion could illuminate both the best and worst parts of ourselves. I carried that understanding forward, quietly shaping my approach to relationships, friendships, and even professional bonds. Through all of this, I recognized the subtle, enduring power of memory. Even without actively seeking him, reminders emerged: an article he would have found interesting, a song we had loved, the faint echo of a joke only we understood. Each memory was a brushstroke in the complex canvas of my life, a reminder that while we cannot undo the past, we can integrate it into who we become. Occasionally, I allowed myself the bittersweet indulgence of imagining alternate realities. What if I had never crossed the line? What if we had met under different circumstances, with no prior boundaries to navigate, no moral lines to test? These daydreams were fleeting and never disruptive, more an acknowledgement of human curiosity than a desire to change history. They reminded me that desire is not inherently wrong, but must be approached with awareness, empathy, and respect for. All involved. Over the years, I found peace in small things: early morning walks when the city was quiet, evenings with friends who had no knowledge of the chaos behind closed doors, the satisfaction of professional achievements earned honestly. Love returned not as a storm to sweep me off my feet, but as a steady flame, warm, nurturing, and unthreatened by the shadows of past mistakes. I built a life that was richer, wiser, and more grounded than I could have imagined in those early days of recklessness. Yet, even now, decades later, the memory of him persists in quiet, unobtrusive ways. It is not a presence that demands action or causes distress, but a subtle thread woven into the fabric of my life. It is a reminder of passion, of mistakes, and of the enduring power of human connection. I have learned that even the most intense, forbidden experiences can leave lessons and insights that endure far beyond the fleeting fire of desire. The story of us, the line crossed, the affair, the stolen moments, and the inevitable consequences, remains a deeply personal chapter, one I reflect on with both humility and clarity. It shaped my understanding of love, trust, and morality, influencing how I interact with others, how I value honesty, and how I navigate the complex interplay of heart and mind. The experience left an indelible mark, not as a source of shame alone, but as a catalyst for growth, self-awareness, and deeper empathy. In the end, life moved forward with its unyielding rhythm. The affair became a memory, vivid and instructive, but no longer a source of pain or longing. Love, responsibility, and reflection guided me in the choices I made afterward. And in those quiet moments, walking along streets that once felt electric, sitting in cafes that once held our laughter, watching the city lights flicker against the night, I recognized the truth of that chapter. It was a moment of human intensity that taught me who I am, what I value, and how far one must go to reconcile desire with integrity. The memory of him, of crossing that line, and of all the consequences that followed remains as a quiet, enduring presence, a story of temptation, risk, growth, and the enduring power of lessons learned in the heart of human vulnerability.